Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. I think there might be another couple of people just sort of coming through over the next couple of minutes, but we'll just make a start. So thank you for joining. This is the third of our future funding webinars. This one's focusing on partnerships. So the first one, we looked at how we could link income generation to the needs of our communities and the needs of society. Second one, we looked at how we put together balanced strategies for income generation and particularly income recovery after COVID as well, and how to ensure sustainability. And now we're starting to look at how we can deliver on these things. So we were looking at the donut model and all the different aspects of support to communities and societies that libraries could provide. But how do we deliver those? How do we deliver these critical, wide-ranging and specialist needs of the communities when we're not necessarily specialists in all these areas? And we don't want to be. We want to be libraries. We don't want to be social workers. We don't necessarily want to be healthcare workers. We want to be able to support, but we don't necessarily want to change the fundamentals of who we are. So the way to do that really is about looking at partnerships. So I've got two bits that I'll be talking about. So first of all, I'm going to start talking about things to consider around partnerships. And then I'm going to take you through an example with my local authority, with Cheshire East, where we'll go through and see what partnerships we might be able to identify. And then we are joined by Carol Holmden from Quorum, and she'll be able to talk about the huge variety of partnerships that the Quorum Group has made with local authorities, with other third sector partners, and with private companies as well. And then we've got an example of a library partnership. So Jane Everest from Gloucestershire is going to be talking about a partnership between Gloucestershire Libraries and the local enterprise partnership, the LEP, to deliver some really exciting work in terms of growth hubs and innovation centres within Gloucestershire Libraries. So just to kick it off, we've got, considering partnerships, so what high level considerations really are things about what's the motivation behind it. So the motivation really is often about capacity, about making sure we've got the right numbers of people and numbers of resources to be able to do it. But then we've also got the expertise about making sure that we have within the partnership the expertise to be able to deliver a service where we don't necessarily have or need that expertise within the library service. There's opportunities in partnerships for cost reduction as well. So there's lots of opportunities there in terms of shared costs, shared back office costs, that kind of thing, which might not necessarily be initially the kind of thing that we'd be looking for as library services, but it might be something that kind of evolves out of the partnerships, and it might be something that where the administration costs of the partnership itself are actually then shared. And then secured income, just trying to put in place sustainable funding streams for the future as well. There's then a number of barriers as well, and the key barriers, some research done by the DFE a few years back around barriers to partnerships within mutuals, so mutual local authority teams that have gone off and spun into mutuals. And the barriers that they'd identified were basically around complexity, so the complexity of contractual arrangements, the complexity of things like IP and things like the way that things need to be structured, the time and resource invested as well. I mean, the big thing I think for a lot of partnerships is that when you're going through and developing these partnerships, you're basically investing weeks, months, years of work for a speculative partnership that might not actually get to anywhere or get to any the point of being funded or being delivered. So there's quite a lot of time and resource investment. And I think what's worth mentioning there is that a lot of that time investment is that senior level capacity as well. And so you need to make sure that we've got that within the library service or accessible to the library service to be able to do that. And then obviously values as well. The values of the library service need to be able to line up with the values of the partner or partners as well. So making sure that we've got shared values and how we define those shared values as well, because for example, a lot of the library services are part of a partnership that we've got with Sopra Steria, On the whole, I wouldn't necessarily say that overall our values were particularly aligned, but I think in terms of within the parameters of the contract that we're delivering, the partnership, our aims and now values towards those aims are aligned in terms of being able to provide an accessible service to as many people as possible. And then finally, risks. So financial risks and liabilities, there's obviously all of the kind of the potential impacts, of financial impacts of whether the finances line up, the matching of income and expenditure and everything, but then also potential liabilities as well. Once we start getting into contractual relationships, we're then getting into the risk of us being liable, or any partner being liable for any action that other people or within the partner. Thank you. Sorry, just having tea and a biscuit delivered. Yeah, so liabilities of the actions of the other partner as well. And then similarly, reputational risk as well. So should one partner do something that really kind of changes the way they're perceived, then that perception will potentially rub off onto the other partners as well. And then the operational risk as well. How do we make sure that what we're setting out to achieve is actually achievable and is then achieved as well? Have we got the right structures in place within the partnership to be able to be accountable, to be able to essentially ensure that all of the things that need to happen do happen, and all the stuff that's being delivered does actually get delivered. So out of that, we've then got these, again, this is just an indication of some different types of partnerships. So we've got from the left-hand side where it's very autonomous and fairly loose. So we've got loose and informal arrangements going all the way to a full integration, so mergers essentially. And within that are then the kind of the various types of partnerships. So obviously there's huge numbers of different types of partnerships and how partnerships can be structured, but they tend to fall within informal arrangements, contractual arrangements, joint ventures. So a partnership where a service or activity is delivered through a third party that is set up by the two partners, or then kind of integration and mergers. And the ones we'd be focusing on really, I suppose, at the moment is the contractual arrangements, where it's potentially a commissioning arrangement, it is a contractual arrangement to jointly deliver a service, that kind of thing as well. So having looked at that, what I've then done is kind of taken a bit of a step back and started looking at how we can practically do this. Who are we going to partner with? Who should libraries be partnering with? And how do we identify who we're going to be partnering with as well? So what I've done is taken my local authority, Cheshire East. I have had no contact with Cheshire East Library Service around this as well. So this isn't to suggest that they're not doing this. I suspect they might be doing some of these partnerships, but it's just as an example. So started out really mapping out some of the potential partners we might work with. So there's the Cheshire East Local Authority with social care, children and family services, public health. There's Aspire Educational Trust, which is an academy group which seems to operate a large proportion of schools across Cheshire East. There's Clinical Commissioning Group, and there's also a couple of hospital trusts alongside that as well. CVS, Community and Voluntary Services, and there's also a social action partnership that's been set up, which is identified as a body owned by the local authority to be able to really sort of push for integrated solutions between third sector, public sector and private sector as well, to reach specific kind of social impact and social outcome measures as well. Then we've got the job centres, and then we've got 871, the Cheshire and Warrington Local Enterprise Partnership, which is obviously much bigger than just the local authority, so we're part of that as Cheshire East. And then we've got two chambers of commerce, East Cheshire and North Cheshire. All of these things, as you'll know, we kind of go through these things, and none of them are quite contiguous with the actual outline of the library service of the local authority as well. But to then start to work out who to partner with, we need to understand what their priorities are, what their aims are, and what their strategies are for the coming year, coming few years, coming decade, if we can. And so one thing that we've been looking at, I was looking at for Cheshire East, was then looking at which of these were part of the same group as well. So there are huge numbers of integrated working groups and things like that. But one of the key ones for Cheshire East is the Health and Wellbeing Board. And most local authorities will have or be in the process of setting up health and wellbeing boards. And they will include these kind of things. So adult social care, children and family service, public health from the local authority, commissioning groups, CCGs, hospital trusts, but then also community and voluntary services and the Social Action Partnership as associate members as well. So essentially it's a way to line up the aims of the local authority and the local health education authorities to be able to then meet the outcomes around health and well-being. So within that, there's two key documents, I think, which are really helpful. One is a joint strategic needs assessment. So you are probably using a joint strategic needs assessment for data for some of your strategies and things like that already. And in this case, it's broken down into a borough profile and a granular breakdown. So there's the overall Cheshire East needs assessment, and then there's the granular breakdown where it looks through the individual measures by electoral ward, essentially. And then from that needs assessment comes a health and wellbeing strategy, and that's to address those needs. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the outcomes for the health and wellbeing strategy, because I think it's quite useful to see those, and then to see in a second how they're actually made up. So the three outcomes are creating a place that supports health and wellbeing, improve mental health and wellbeing of people living and working in Cheshire East, and then enable more people to live well for longer. So kind of things that you would sort of expect, but it gets a bit more interesting when you start looking into the objectives against them. So looking at outcome one, to create a place that supports health and wellbeing for everyone living in Cheshire East, we've got things that aren't the kind of things that you would expect potentially from a really narrow focus on health and wellbeing, and actually looking at much broader local community and society development things. So looking at maintaining low numbers of 16 to 70-year-olds not in education, employment or training, increasing people employment, reducing the number of people who are killed on the roads, increasing people using outdoor space, and reducing the number of households that experience fuel poverty. So it looks at a much broader range of things than just the kind of traditional health and well-being agenda, and then starts to bring in these other things, which actually are things that libraries really could tap into, providing some kind of services to address these needs as well. So looking at then the strategic needs assessment itself, it's in two parts. It's got the borough profile, which is things like this, where we've got loads of different and quite wide-ranging statistics around where the local authority as a whole is. So Cheshire East, significantly high proportion of people killed or injured on the roads, and a slightly higher prevalence of smokers in Cheshire East than the Northwest or in England more widely as well. And then also, I mean, there's lots and lots, there's pages and pages of this kind of thing, so I'm not going to go through it all. And then also looking at other things like CO2 emissions, where actually there's hugely higher CO2 emissions in Cheshire East than there are elsewhere in either the Northwest or in England as well. So those two things together kind of suggest that perhaps there might be partnerships around road safety, around support to stop smoking, and around support to reduce carbon emissions as well. And they feel like there's potentially a good source of funding out there for them as well. Once we've gone past the borough profile, looking on the more detailed bits, we then have these bits, which are called the tartan rug charts. As you can see, I don't expect anyone to be able to see any of the writing on there, so don't worry about that. We'll look at some bigger bits in future. But essentially what we've got along the top is the individual wards within Cheshire East, and then down the side, we've got a selection of different measures. So things like total population, proportion of the population in BME groups, the proportion of people who aren't proficient in English, hospital admissions for different different activities and different ages, unemployment, unemployment, child poverty, and people with low income, and then also things around life expectancy and things like that. So it's an incredibly sort of detailed and useful amount of information, but there's a lot of it. So what I've then done, so thinking across the wider library service, there's then those potential partnerships around those three key things, say, about smoking, road safety, and carbon footprint. We could then look at individual areas. So looking at Macclesfield, we've got the red areas here. Herdsfield ward has got 45% of pensioners living alone. On the right-hand side, the final column is the English proportion as well, the proportion for the whole of England. So we can see that there's sort of 50% more pensioners living alone in Herdsfield than there are across the country. Similarly as well, we've got hospital stays for self-harm, which I've highlighted as well. The standardised admission rate for England is 100, and getting up into some wards up to more than 3 times that as well. So looking at the individual breakdowns, we can then see some really targeted and localized information about the kind of services that we might want to provide or might want to support. And I think this really highlights, for example, the hospital stays for self-harm. That's not something that libraries can do. That's not something that libraries can do on their own. But when we start looking at other partners or potential partners, looking at Mind, they've got local Mind locations around the northwest around the northwest, but there's literally none in Cheshire East as well. So whether there is a partnership that Macclesfield Library, for example, could then set up with Mind to be able to deliver those kind of services, along with the hospital trust that those admissions would go to, that feels like that would be a partnership that would be worth exploring. And then similarly, looking at a different town really within or different city within Cheshire East, very, very different statistics. And so proficiency of English, there's Central Crewe St Barnabas, where there's high levels of people who don't have a very high proficiency in English, and similarly high levels of children in poverty. And GCSE achievement in Crewe St Barnabas ward is just over 30% of people have or leave school with 5 or more GCSEs or A to C or above, which is not much higher than half of the national average. So massive kind of challenge there in that ward. And then so how can the libraries in Crewe be able to address that? So what we're then looking at is kind of taking those bits. So for Macclesfield, we've got loneliness to older people, and we've already got a partnership with a reading agency that is working to roll out a loneliness program. And so tapping into that will be an ideal start to that. Addressing acute mental health and self-harm. And I think that's that thing there, discussions with Mind, Mid Cheshire, and then also East Cheshire NHS Trust, which is responsible for those hospitals who are taking those admissions. And then for Crewe, those 2 things about English language learning. Stoke, a nearby town, has got an ESOL for Education Fund award. Obviously Stoke is not Crewe and is outside of Cheshire East, but it feels like that would be a good place to start those discussions. And then similarly for the targeted GCSE support for that specific ward, there's some quite significant, large multinational corporations in Crewe. So there's Bush UK and EMAC. One's an engineering company, one's an insurance package company, and whether there's potential for to work with those and with the schools in that area as well, to be able to bring in volunteers, to be able to bring in funding and bring in other ways to partner. So essentially, we've then using that process of going through identifying the key stakeholders or the key potential partners, identifying the Health and Wellbeing Board as a route to be able to identify their priorities, and then digging down into what their priorities are. We've managed to identify quite a few potentially incredibly socially beneficial priorities, but also ones that should be able to provide a sustainable level of funding in the future as well. So we'll put all that detail together and put it on the Basecamp as well, just so that people can look through that. And then also I think it might be, hopefully it'll be a helpful starting off point for you then to looking at your own local authorities and your own heads of your own library service areas as well. But what we want to do now is just move to Carol Holmden, who is going to be talking more widely about the range of partnerships and the types of partnerships that the Quorum Group has been able to set up. So Carol, can I pass across to you?
Yes, hello Ian, and hello everyone. It's a real joy to reconnect with Ian and to be invited to talk to you all. I have no idea who you are. So apart from one lovely colleague who says they come from Worcestershire, I actually have really very little idea where you're all from. So I'm hoping that in the questions we will be able to pick that up, because there is nowhere in the country that you could not partner with Quorum, if that is appropriate to you. But it's hard for me to precisely specify that without knowing where you're from. So the first thing I want to say is, who is Quorum and why has Ian invited me? Well, I think Quorum is the world's oldest children's charity, established in 1739. And today we continue to focus on the needs of children. We are mercilessly focused on the needs of improving outcomes for children. But these days we are also a specialist group of children's charities and unique in so being. So we're the leading children's rights centre for children. We're the leading provider in personal, social and health education. We're a leading adoption and fostering agency, the leading membership organisation in our space. Now that's relevant because the Quorum Group has actually been formed from the world's oldest children's charity by forming a set of 10 organisations, half of which have voluntarily joined the Quorum Group. And we never use the word merger. Yeah, there is no merger. The world's oldest charity will be merging with no one, but they do get to join the group. But I'm actually going to just talk about two examples, one which perhaps amplifies the principles that Ian has been talking about, and the second which presents perhaps more dynamic opportunity and relevance. So I think what was in Ian's mind was that Quorum has formed the only charity-led, or as we're known in our sector, voluntary adoption agency-led regional adoption agency. Government has restructured the network of 152 local authorities into a cluster of regional adoption agencies, which involved a great deal of compulsion by legal requirement, which led to a whole load of initial speed dating, defaulting to the usual, except in one case. So in most instances, the local authorities that already knew each other and liked each other came together, and if they didn't like them, they didn't welcome them, which has left Birmingham slightly out on a limb. In Quorum is the Quorum-led regional adoption agency is the only one to have had its members specifically decide and elect to join. So we had 5 local authorities in London and Slough who became part of the initial bid, and then we have had 5 further local authorities elect and apply to join. Now, any of you who are close to these environments will know how extremely unusual that is. That it was selected to put a charity voluntary adoption agency in the lead, and the second that we actually had a queue of people wanting to join. Now, the key learning from that is that senior level buy-in to the vision is a critical ingredient. And the key man in our environment is probably the only director of children's services in the UK who was actually adopted. and he has given it his full personal attention. And we do not allow them to pass the baton down the endless chain of command that then involves 17 people from a local authority turning up at every meeting. It's the DCS or no one at the Strategic Governance Board. The second thing is the driver, which is of course for improved outcomes, which means that we can only partner on the basis of the fact that we're the best. So the track record and expertise is critical, or access to a new market. So Quorum is the only organisation in the UK ever to have run local authority adoption services, and we've been doing it for 12 years. So things do not spontaneously combust. You're only as good as the expertise you have and the track record that you can bring to bear. And so the basis of that expertise and brand value is absolutely critical. So in our case, for example, a local authority that is struggling to recruit the best caliber of social workers has, several of them have found that they recruit better social workers when the word Quorum is at the front. So, and that's very interesting, even in relation to terms and conditions. So there must be added value. And some of that added value that Quorum is able to bring is that we run national matching services for children. Nobody else does. We have the only national young ambassadors program called the Adoptables. Nobody else does. We're the only and leading publisher in our field. No one else does. And so on. So local authorities joining with us were bringing their credibility and direct responsibility for children in care to combine with the wider learning and convening power and innovation capacity of Quorum as a charity. It does not cost less. In fact, it costs more, but it doesn't matter how much it costs, because the only way in which you achieve the cost benefit in adoption is by placing a child who needs to be placed as quickly as possible, and everything else is fluff and bluster. We did not create any joint venture vehicle because of registration issues. If you're already an outstanding voluntary adoption agency, what on earth would you want to go through another registration process with Ofsted for? If you set up any kind of special purpose vehicle, who the hell is bearing the pensions debt or liability or capitalizing the reserves? So therefore, there are occasions in which a special purpose vehicle is appropriate, and we have created them in the past, but unless you address those structural issues, you only spend all your time talking about those structural issues. We already have a trading company, so why not use the mechanisms that already work? So what we're learning from that experience, which actually will go across the other example I would give, is that making these things work, in addition to having actually an answer to the question, why us? And what is distinctive? And distinctiveness is all. So what is distinctive that each player or partner is bringing to bear? And the third question is, so what? The purpose is not the partnership. The partnership is to deliver the purpose. And if it isn't going to deliver the purpose, what on earth are we all sitting around in endless meetings talking about partnership for? So in addition to those criteria, in my experience, relationships are absolutely key. The timing is crucial, and that speed dating is critical. So if there's a bid opportunity, you've got to be able to speed date very quickly. And then you need to be looking at how are we together going to increase reach and relevance. And then what I would say is the most crucial ingredient of all, which is the creation of desire. So you will be able to tell that I am a marketeer by background, and you need to be able to create the desire. And the desire is not just about we've got a problem analysis, which our intellectual rationale tells us entirely this is the right thing to do, but this is the thing we want to do because it's going to be really exciting, it's going to make things better, and we're going to feel proud. So it is the opportunity that you are looking for change. So I'm happy to go in, it's quite a technical realm in terms of adoption, but what is critical to it is the fact that it's extremely close to the statutory purpose. And lots of the barriers that are put in the way are usually mythologies. So Quorum is also the only ever non-statutory agency to actually hold the statutory duty for the adoption decision. And there is actually nothing that prevents that from happening, but it will be constantly presented to you that there is. And then secondly, the other thing you would get is the so-called democratic mandate or the political accountability. And one of the absolutely crucial ingredients in the partnerships that Quorum has succeeded in achieving in multiple arenas is we talk rather about custodianship. And the thing about a charity is that it is accountable to the children and it is accountable to the public. It is not accountable to the 37% of people who happen to choose to vote that week. So children are not a political matter. That doesn't mean to say that you do not actually need to be paying absolutely due regard to the question of accountability, transparency, and engagement. And my final message on this is we always say that in the development of these partnerships, you need the stellar array, which means you don't only need the Director of Children's Services, you need the Chief Executive and the leader. And unless you have those lined up, you're unlikely to achieve something of this strategic order. So I'm going to move on from that technicality because I have a particular thing that I think is very interesting or might be very interesting to all of us in the library space. Quorum has just launched a new website called quorumstory.org.uk. It went live last week. I'm not drowning you with slides. You can be bringing it up rather than looking at me and my painting by Cameron Rudd in the background. So quorumstory.org.uk is the portal to Quorum's history. And Quorum holds the longest continuing archive of children's social care, which is extremely fragile. It is held for us by the London Metropolitan Archives. It is the jewel of the London Metropolitan Archive collection, because although it's only something like 3% of their holdings, it's something like 9% of their interest. This is a unique archive, therefore, and it is also the soul of Quorum. We are the longest continuing charity. Thomas Quorum might walk in at any moment. Our duty to the child in 1739 feels absolutely the same as our duty to the child in 2021. So we are digitizing 25% of this archive. And this is a partnership in that Quorum bid to the National Lottery Heritage Fund with the full support and partnership of the London Metropolitan Archive, which is our digital partner. We are not only digitizing, but we're also transcribing via Zooniverse, which many of you will be familiar with, and we already have hundreds of volunteers around the world now transcribing. But the crucial ingredient to our proposition is, in fact, that this is the Voices Through Time story of care, and that we are co-producing everything with care experienced young people today. And there will be 10 creative projects with 10 creative partners, the first of whom was the Royal Literary Foundation, and the second of which is Arcola Theatre, so that young people are able to engage with their heritage, tell their story today, and improve the future of care for tomorrow. And next week you will see the launch of hashtag Real Lives in Care, which is the young people's own campaign to tackle the continuing stigma of care, all based on their experience in working in the archive. And this is part of a program we call HALO, which is Heritage, Arts and Literary Opportunity, whereby young people help other young people, and we improve their pathways into work, their own life story development, and the capacity of the voluntary sector. So this is part of the Coram vision for the Coram Story Centre. And in the Coram Story Centre, we now intend to develop something called the Library of Care. If you would like to be a library partner to Coram in this exciting development, you know who to contact. So in that regard, I think that there are a whole set of lessons that I wanted to draw out. One of the principles that is the most critical to Coram in everything that we do, and in my view is at the heart of partnership, is the principle of no duplication. If you can do it, you do it. If we're the best at it, we do it. We don't pay two people to sit in a room and discuss how neither of them are going to do it. The simplicity of mechanism is either I'm leading or you're leading, either you're contributory or we're contributory. The contract arrangements are straightforward. The process of the KPIs, you get paid when you've done it. So some of these principles are perfectly straightforward kind of commercial principles, but they are remarkably important in partnership working between agencies of different types. There should not be more than one specialist in a partnership, because all that happens is you argue over whose form is best, or which one of us is actually slightly better because we do it slightly differently from you. So these are the principles that we have found. So whenever we set up partnerships, we would only have one partner from each sector. We would not have multiple ones. So it's very different from the principle of, for example, interagency working in, a community setting, in my view. So some of the things that came into my mind that I thought would be really interesting just to touch base on. So, if you were looking for partners in any of the following areas, would you have thought about Coram? And if not, why not? We're a specialist outreach provider, including in the Northwest, for example, and in East Anglia, for young people in care. We don't have any problem reaching them. We are a specialist in migrant young people. We have the only national Young Ambassadors program who are themselves young migrants because their voice was not being heard. We also have a national voice, which is the National Leaving Care Council, Young People in Care Council. We have a network of 2,000 reading volunteers. We are a specialist evaluator, including evaluating the Arts Mark, for example. We are an educator delivering with 50,000 school teachers registered for our curriculum. We can create curriculum, we can test it, we can bring it into place. We created a new Key Stage 2 module on Thomas Coram, published a book on Thomas Coram, crowdfunded, so it went to every school. We're a specialist in the voice of children and young people, producing the only national surveys of young people's emotional and subjective well-being. Finally, there are program opportunities for partnership that are sitting there in relation to the Story Centre or the next project, which we hope will be touring. Might it be you? I hope that's been helpful. I probably took far longer than 10 minutes, but there's too much to say. And I hope some of those things are at least resonant and set up our discussion for later.
Yes, that was fantastic. Thank you, Carol. And yeah, the things that really resonated with me, I think, were that whole thing about not needing to cost less, and really kind of owning your own value and understanding your own value, and actually it's about the impact rather than the price. But then also things like the structural issues, having been involved in partnerships in the past, which have ended up just going round and round the houses about who's accountable for what, who's responsible for what, which meetings are being set up to arrange, use what's in place. And similar, I suppose on the same line, sort of like that thing about relationships being key. And what you're saying about speed dating, particularly about the when bids come up as well, it's that when things come out, scrabbling around to try and find partners. So I think partly that, getting good at that, but then I suppose also the corollary to that is start having the discussions early as well, isn't it? And start to see what's coming up. But really that whole thing about what the partnership's for, and that creation of desire really kind of resonates as well. We need to make partnerships that actually are going to make a difference, and that's the whole point of them as well. And fantastic opportunity with the Quorum story in the Library of Care as well. So obviously everyone, feel free to get in touch with Carol directly, or just get in touch with me if you want as well. Does anyone have any questions for Carol now, before we go on to Jane, who's going to talk about the LEP partnership? Although we will have group questions later on.
If I could just say two things while you're thinking. I didn't particularly flag up corporate partnerships, although you will recognise that as a charity we have multiple corporate partnerships. And I think the only thing I would say about it is that they tend to be easier because it's clearer that there has to be a win-win. And actually they tend to be simpler in the focus in that sense, because the key question at the beginning is, do we have a shared problem analysis? Yeah. On what we're actually going to achieve, and do we have aligned values in what we're going to deliver? And where we've had partnership failures, there has been that one of those two things, the answer is no.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. Are there any questions, or should we go on to Jane? Brilliant. Jane, would you like to talk now on the LEP partnership, please?
Yep, thanks Ian. Hope everybody can hear me. Not quite sure how I follow that, but I just wanted to talk really about our partnership in Gloucestershire with the Local Enterprise Partnership, and about our Growth Hub network, and particularly about our innovation labs. So just a bit of background about how we got involved. In summer 2016, Gloucestershire's Local Enterprise Partnership invited expressions of interest with partners who wish to deliver business support at locations throughout the county. Their aim was to have 3 tiers of growth hubs, tier 1s which delivered specialist business advice aimed at high growth businesses, tier 2s delivering business advice, networking opportunities and incubation spaces, and tier 3s which would be access points to the wider growth hub provision. We quickly saw the opportunity that being part of this network would bring to the library service, and more particularly, we strongly believed that staff were really well placed to deliver what the Growth Hub were looking for. It was interesting listening to Carol that I think it is about grabbing those opportunities and being quick to move. So Library's USP for us was that we could provide locations throughout the county that attract over 2 million visits a year, giving high visibility to business information and support, and a consistent presence in local communities through trusted, neutral spaces, providing a friendly, familiar environment. Those of you that are here know exactly what our library's USP was, but we were able to actually bring that to the bid that we put into the Local Enterprise Partnership. The LEP board unanimously, if I can say it, agreed that we were the ideal partner to deliver the tier 3 offer and the Growth Hub funding, and the Growth Hub at the library was born. We received capital funding from GFirst LEP to fund furniture, equipment and branding, and to introduce marketing screens, interactive touch screens and mobile devices into our libraries. We launched our first Growth Hub in September 17 in the Forest of Dean, for any of you that do know Gloucestershire, with all 31 libraries up and running by the end of March 18. The funding gave us the opportunity to buy new furniture, to do some mini refurbs to create our Growth Hub areas. And the Growth Hub offer in each library obviously changes in size, because we've got the really big offers and then obviously a little tiny one in Bolton. As part of this though, we also took the opportunity to introduce 2 innovation labs within our bid. We weren't definitive about what these were or indeed where they were going to be placed, because what we wanted to do was work closely with partners to identify the location in the county to actually place them. We initially launched our first lab in the Forest of Dean, July 18, but it became quickly obvious that we needed specific skills to drive forward our vision. So in December 18, we recruited to an innovation manager post, and we really haven't looked back since. This aspect of the Growth Hub offer is what's really taken off in Gloucestershire. We believe that the success of the Innovation Lab is that it's actually based in a library. The lab is locally accessible within a known, trusted and safe space, and our position within local communities also enables us to reach those with hidden needs who don't have the confidence to venture into a more formal setting. Since 2019, our Innovation Lab has now worked with over 100 businesses and sole traders, empowering them to use technology to improve efficiency. We've partnered with a major employer in the Forest of Dean to deliver a workshop programme for schools, inspiring future entrepreneurs and supporting STEM engagement, and also improving aspiration and opportunity for over 300 children. We formed a partnership with the National Cyber Security Centre to deliver code-based clubs for 8 to 14 year olds, providing access so far for over 200 children. We've delivered community workshops attended by over 100 individuals of all ages and abilities, and we've worked with individuals to design, develop and prototype new product ideas. I could go on and on about the benefits of the Innovation Lab, but really we've won 3 awards, and you wouldn't believe it, but we've actually been shortlisted for the National Pub Industry Awards for our contribution and partnering with one of the major businesses in the Forest of Dean. A second lab in Gloucester is currently being prepared. Unfortunately, it was delayed from being delivered last year due to the pandemic, but work is on track again, and we're hoping that will be open in some shape or form by the end of March. The key to this particular project is that we identified very quickly that we need somebody in each lab who can be comfortable with the equipment we have, so the workshops and the one-to-one support can be delivered. We were lucky that we had a really keen member of staff who we actually invested the time in so that he became self-taught and was given a level of input into the kit we went on to buy and the types of sessions we were providing. This commitment to this member of staff has actually paid off. He now regularly trains other library staff, encouraging them to play with the equipment, which they can take back to their own libraries to deliver pop-up innovation labs, working with more partnerships in their own local communities. This learning has also meant we've now created a bespoke post, which is an innovation lab technician. And this has further encouraged the member of staff to become a real part of the project and support further rollouts. For us, the success of the Forest Innovation Lab has directly led to us becoming an integral part of Gloucestershire County Council's COVID-19 economic recovery strategy. Again, libraries' USP being the local, trusted, neutral space is exactly what's required to help local communities and individuals recover from the economic hit the pandemic has brought. Being part of the recovery strategy has led to us receiving an increase to our base budget, which is unheard of in these times, I think, in order to extend our labs to roll out to a further 4 districts, enabling us to have a lab in every single area of the county. The money will pay for an additional 4 lab technicians, a project manager, and a proportion of the setup costs. The remainder of the setup costs will be used by providing Section 106 developers' contributions in the libraries where the labs will be set up. Alongside strengthening our lab offer, we've applied for and been accepted as part of the PatLib network. Staff have been undertaking training and will be launching this offer in April formally through our Ask Us service. The key thing for me is all of this activity, included the added investment, has coincided with the retirement of one of my senior leadership team. So it's given me the opportunity to look again at our staffing structure, and I've now created a role that will pull together all of our business offer, the Growth Hub and partnerships with the LEP, the Innovation Labs, our new PatLib offer, and our next plan, which is to strengthen and rebrand our business advice service. We've now created partnerships with adult education to deliver basic skills and community-based training. And we're now also linking with what we have in Gloucestershire, which are a Forwards team, which basically help with skills and employment for people with disabilities. Our relationship and partnership with GFirst LEB is good. However, it's not all shiny. So I also want to give you sort of the reality as well. We're aware that the Growth Hub's targets are aimed at high investment and business growth. So we are at times in a partnership seen as less important than other partners around the network. This is actually okay with us. We're not overly scrutinised about our targets, but they are definitely on board with what we bring to the partnership. They're on board with the Innovation Lab project, the benefits these can bring, and actually advocate on behalf of us for this project. The whole thing for us has been a really steep learning curve, but it's brought huge benefits. And the biggest benefit, I think, from our point of view, is not only the service that we're providing to our customers and the fact that we're able to help people with hidden needs, but also that now we've got a really high profile within Gloucestershire County Council. So I wanted to end there. Thank you for listening. And obviously, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take any.
Thank you so much, Jane. That sounds just a fascinating project, and I think just an amazing example of partnerships being dynamic things as well. It's just clear from the start of it, it's not set up the partnership and then just let it run. It's set up the partnership, let it grow, let it evolve, let it change, and kind of those really key things about investing in the right skills with your innovation manager, but then also in terms of the time into individuals and making sure that they've got the right skills and kind of feel enabled to then grow into those roles as well. I thought it was really interesting as well, that thing about the inequality in terms of partnerships, in that we're never all going to be equal partners, and we might be coming from a position of almost like a facilitating partner rather than, I suppose, like from a lot of Carol's partnerships, which would be sort of the expert partner. And so for some of those, it might be that for the library sector, given that a lot of our work is focused on almost those kind of more universal pre-preventative services, we might not have the same standing within these partnerships as some others. And I think we need as a sector to try and understand how we can manage that in a way that doesn't put us at a different disadvantage in terms of partnerships as well. Brilliant. So does anyone have any questions for, thank you, Carol. Does anyone have any questions for Jane as well? In fact, Subnam's got one. Subnam, do you want to ask the question or do you want us to ask it?
Yeah, I can do. So it's a question for Jane. Do you get any additional annual funding following your initial capital funding, and are they linked to any KPIs?
No, this particular project was purely capital funding. So it did come with a bit of a challenge, but we were aware that library staff, the key thing from their point of view is around information provision. And this was really about signposting and information provision. So it came with a bit of training. But what it has led on to, as I say, is this investment now in the library's base budget to create 4 additional posts. And I think the other thing that we were quite creative with was around initially using Capital 106 money. I created a project post, which is how we got the Innovation Lab Manager, which you can use capital funding for. And then again, what we were able to do was to attract revenue funding to continue that post. and indeed create the further posts. So whilst the actual project didn't come with ongoing revenue, it's created its own ability to create revenue.
Brilliant, thank you. Any further questions for Carol or Jane? I've got one question for Carol and Jane as well. One thing that kind of struck me when you were talking, Carol, about the identifying the stellar array, so making sure that we've got the chief exec and the DCS, the Director of Children's Services, as part of the steering group. That's not going to be possible for all of the things as well. It's going to, so for some partnerships, that's not necessarily going to be the thing. But I suppose what are the characteristics that you'd need or you'd want to see in a, I won't call it the less than stellar array, but the kind of the slightly structurally lower level array that you might need?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because you know, it is horses for courses, and obviously you can't have to send everything up every chain in order to get anything done. What I have learned is that if there's a written plan somewhere in the authority or whichever the organisation is, that makes clear the latitude that they have to act, then you can cite that, because that's actually giving the managerial person, whichever one it is that you might be needing to engage with in any particular project, their mandate. And if they hit barriers, then that's the mandate that they and you need to be citing. I think the other thing is it is also, everybody wants good news to tell, especially senior people. You know, think about the people involved. In my neck of the woods, the Director of Children's Services has always got the lead member for Children's Services coming in, asking them stuff. And it's really, whether they're a government minister or a lead member or the boss of whoever you're working with, they always want good news. So if you can actually say something along the lines of, well, we've been able to leverage this extra 10.5p from over here, and we've actually exceeded our targets by 17.5%. You know, it's making sure that you're, in my view, it's constantly building that sense of pride, because with the pride goes more motivation, more energy, better problem solving. So the sort of stuff I was talking about was, you know, very close to statutory purpose, which leads to people being shot. You know, really, really heavyweight stuff. It's also subject to government direction. So you've got, yeah. But I think the same principles apply, which is always be generating that pride and always be generating the clarity about, you know, what each partner is actually supposed to be doing as opposed to talking about. I don't know if I can be more specific, and I think Jane effectively was giving some indicators and clarity in what she was saying there. She was creating energy.
Yes, yeah.
You know, what was being created was energy, that what I'm talking about, that desire and that motivation. And, you know, if you hit a rock, don't bother trying to push it uphill. Go and find a different rock. Or go and find a different way round. I think it's constantly about that energy, isn't it? The problem is that if that rock is the person who's actually going to say, no, this is not aligned to our strategy, this is, you know, that's where you have to be clear that you are aligned to the strategy. I managed to get a decision just recently, and it's quite big league stuff, but it doesn't make any difference. The principles are the same. I managed to get a decision that absolutely astonished me from a local authority. I've never seen it before. A massively imaginative leap. And the reason was because they'd already got the mandate through a rather obscure path to do with you know, the strategic plan for this or that, the other, and the capital funding allocation. So that's why I say what I say about making sure that you know what's creating the halo, if the halo under which you can go,
Yeah.
and otherwise ignore it all and do it on a trading basis.
Fair enough, yeah. So I suppose in that sense, those strategies and things are kind of, to use your your stellar array analogy, they're almost sort of paths to the stars. So if you've got
That's
got the chief exec's strategy there, even if you're working with someone who's not on chief exec level, you've still kind of got a direct line to them through those strategies, and so presumably through the health and wellbeing strategy plan and all that kind of thing would provide that, I suppose.
And there's nothing to stop you doing informal briefings. You know, I did just think you would like to know about the 3 young people who've never been to a library before, who were in our library last Saturday because of X, Y, and Z, you know. And sometimes we forget to do that. We forget to do that, that stuff, you know.
Yes. Yeah, I think that leads on quite well to the question that Isabel's just asked for Jane. Do you want to ask that, Isabel?
Thank you. Yeah, it leads on perfectly. So I was really struck, Jane, when you talked about the way that you use this project, and it's really grown your profile within the council, so that now that they're looking at their post-pandemic recovery plan and how to prioritise council services and resources and so on, the library's in the right position, and you're going to have a really great place in that. But councils are really busy. You know, there's always new priorities coming up. Senior people are supremely busy. Elected members can have quite short attention spans. So really, Carol, I think you gave some brilliant hints there on how to really grow and sustain that. But Jane, I wonder from your perspective, what have been the things that have really worked there? And are there any things where you realise with hindsight it was a bit of a waste of time and you wish you'd channeled your internal advocacy energy in a slightly different direction?
Yeah, and I think, Isabella, I think you're aware that, you know, we've had these conversations before, that it's very difficult for libraries to get a foot in the door. We know what the big ticket items are in the local authorities, and it's like pushing a rock uphill trying to get in there. But I think this particular one just seems to have hit I think partly it was timing. Obviously we were able to position ourselves at the right time in the right place, and I think that's one of the things I've learned, is I think that's the key. It's about listening to the conversations, and it's about putting your foot in the door at the right time. But also I think it is about having the ears of the right people. So my particular director is a huge advocate of it. The reason he's a huge advocate of it, as is now the director of resources, which is very helpful, is because we kind of dragged them out there. We got them to see what it was doing, but also, again, echoing things that have been said before, it's about having the real stories to tell as well. You know, we've got some really good, I don't want to call them case studies, because it's people's lives and it's the impact that it's had on people. And when you can give the real impact that particular lab has had on somebody, I think it really starts to hit home. So it's been a slog, but it's actually started to bring with it its own momentum, if I'm honest now, but it's been hard work getting there.
Brilliant. Did you have anything to add to that, Carol, as well? Because
two things came into my mind. I'll tell you a little anecdote. So long time ago, when I worked in the university sector, I had an away day, and we were saying, oh God, you know, we can't get this done, we can't get that done. And my action from the day was spend more time in the lift with the financial controller. Okay. Oh, hi, how are you? Oh, you know, I bet you don't know that we've just done this, you know. So at that point that Jane was saying there about building that relevance, and I always laugh about the idea of my having an objective to spend more time in the lift with the financial controller. But I tell you what, it really did work. And it's what Jane is saying about, you know, engaging and getting those people on the inside. So that came to my mind. And the other thing was also having, and forgive me for being a bit commercial, but you know, I'm a former marketing director. So I would say, whose brand do you need a piece of? So who has got the credibility or the complementarity or the access route or the sex appeal that you actually want a bit of? And, you know, so one of the reasons that we get a lot of approaches for partnership in the arena of children is because of the connectivity and credibility and longevity that we have in children's services. So they might be struggling, but we might be able to get the door open. You see what I mean? It's not that we're actually any good at doing whatever the thing is that's being done, it's that we can get the door open. So I'll give you a very particular example, which is a wonderful, friends in a local authority really struggling to make early permanence placements, as they would be called, for children who are still in the court process. And this involves really complicated working with the courts. And the local authority lawyers were very good, the adoption service was very good, but they were having a trouble in engaging the courts. So we formed a partnership, and Corum's credibility as a legal centre enabled us to open the door to the court, and we ended up with the judge, the local judge who had been considered the barrier, actually hosting quarterly meetings to discuss how we were going to do more of the thing. So that's where partnerships from unusual quarters can sometimes actually create this spark and this access pathway. So it might be, we're very familiar with the notion of a local business leader, but I do think sometimes we need to think across the local and national barriers more. I was once asked to go to a meeting in Tottenham after the Tottenham riots, which was asking the question, how can we do more here in Tottenham? Which is on the outskirts of London, isn't in the sort of sexy West End. And the points that came across was, well, can we get the people who own the clubs that young people want to go to in the West End to set up a club here in Tottenham? Yeah, so there's something there about creating that, whose brand, as I were, would add value in this way. And I think Jane was indicating some interesting areas there. And the final point is that Corum is doing a lot of work around innovation in children's services. And maybe actually we can showcase and cite examples of where libraries have actually been precisely an unusual suspect and a critical dynamic partner, as Jane has just inspired us with, and merchandise that out to then help you to be able to cite those examples more powerfully when you're facing barriers in your own area. Sometimes it's a question of saying, well, they've done it in wherever it is, and if you choose the right location that they've done it in, given that that's the biggest rival to whoever you're talking to, they're not going to get left behind.
Yes, absolutely. And I do think that thing about looking at different ways for us to, I suppose from our perspective, from Libraries Connected, to really nationally profile some of these things as well. Because I think what really strikes me with the thing that Jane's talking about, the partnership with the LEP in Gloucestershire, is that it's essentially trying to address the same aims as, or some of the same aims as the BIPC service from the British Library, and yet going a completely different route about it. And I think bringing something completely different to it as well. And I wonder, is there anyone here who has got, is there anyone here who's working with the BIPC in their library service who just wants to talk about what the differences between that as well?
I'm happy to do that if you want me to, Ian.
Yes, that would be brilliant. Actually, yeah, I'm just interested in terms in if there's different learnings from the different ways of approaching the same topic.
Also, we're adjacent to Gloucestershire, so I'm in Worcestershire, so I'm familiar with the Gloucestershire service, if not very familiar. But we're relative newcomers to the BIPC, so we're still in the pilot phase, and we're just about to launch in a couple of months. It's been a really fantastic experience from our perspective. I think the difference is that, as Jane mentioned, it was very much in Gloucestershire about that upfront capital funding, and it was that partnership with the LEP. We started without any funding, and we were seeking partnerships with our economic development team to bid for ERDF money, which we did successfully. And in the meantime, a pot of money from the DCMS came in via the British Library as well. So we've got 2 streams of funding now for our programme. I think I'm right in saying, Jen, it's a little bit different in that we have a team who actually provide activity, and we provide IP. We're a PatLib centre, we provide IP guidance, and we also run webinars. So I think that whilst we also signpost to our online resources and to our partners offers and business support services locally, we also, I think we have a slightly bulkier offer. I think that's the difference. Is that fair to say, Jane? Yeah. And the Innovation Lab sounds awesome, so I'm hopping over to steal that idea. Does that help, Ian?
Yes, that's brilliant. Thank you. Because I don't have a really detailed understanding of the IPC service, but that's really helpful. Nick, are you just popping your camera on to ask a question?
I was going to just follow up on that about the BIPC, and what Jane has said, and Janine, is it's interesting that everything we've heard from the 2 presenters have been around clarity of purpose for me, that actually understanding that clarity of purpose was primary in sort of creating those partnerships. Or what Jane was talking about in Gloucestershire, I'm really fascinated by, because it felt like an organic growth from need and identifying that there was opportunity there and creating the value, because we're about creating value in all these things, aren't we? We're about creating value for customers, for staff, for the local authority. So we have those stories that people can sell on and then reinvest in us. So those partnerships that have a clarity of purpose ignore setting up all the architecture, which we're so good at, and the bureaucracy, but actually punching through to actually delivery, and then demonstrating delivery, and then working with others to demonstrate something laterally. You were talking about, libraries being unusual co-contributors or partners, which was really interesting. The BIPC, we in Sheffield have been running it from 2015. It's been one of the joys that I came into libraries late, and it was just fantastic to see libraries making a real impact for people who wouldn't necessarily access business related and support services. And what James was talking about, people with hidden needs as well, they are people that access libraries, that use libraries, actually probably never even thought of starting a business. So coming across our services are fantastic. So the BIPC has been fantastic for that. I just find it fascinating that there's different ways of doing it. One's a model from the top that we're applying them, and sometimes you've got to really ensure that you've got clarity of purpose, because you don't then just want it to become, oh, how do we spend the money? How do we employ that people, and how do we create an architecture? It's actually, well, are we actually generating outcomes? Are we helping people? Might be not how we've intended, but are we helping people? So I think always going back to that clarity and saying, well, are we doing what we want to do with this as a partnership or as a resource? So I just think it's fascinating, actually. But it's about creating, for me, it's that clarity of purpose and creating value and working with others to connect, to create new value. We are entrepreneurs, aren't we, in a way? We create new value where we're social entrepreneurs rather than, entrepreneurs looking for cash. We're looking for value in our communities. I just find it fascinating. Really, really good couple of presentations. Thank you.
Can I just come in on that, actually, just to respond to what Nick said? Because I think you're absolutely right, Nick. We started off with one kind of one aim when we put our bid in. That's not where we've ended up. And the rollout of the innovation labs and the location of the 2 innovation labs that we've got have been very much community driven. And what we're providing has morphed into what that particular community wants. So, and they will be different across the districts because of the locations that they will be in. So the one in Colford is quite engineering based, because we're partnered with quite an engineering firm, so it's around STEM. But the one that's going into Gloucester, we've got quite a strong partnership with the University of Gloucestershire, and there's a lot more sort of media interest around there. So it is about understanding what the community wants and reacting to ensure that we're meeting the community needs. And you've hit the nail on the head with the fact that we are, and I'm hoping that, and I'm sure Janine will sort of back this up from Worcestershire's point of view as well, is that from our point of view, we are attracting people that would never walk into a formal business location, that perhaps doesn't even know that they'd got business idea in the first place, or lacks the confidence to go and find the skills. They kind of, a lot of them fall into finding the skills through us.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just having a look at the comments. One thing that, obviously the term social entrepreneurs has gone down really well. We'll have to start making sure we use it, and not socialpreneurs, which I have heard, but I'm not quite sure how to pronounce. Carol has just asked, what would help you as the change agents to do more? So what would we need in terms of support? What kind of help and assistance would help us to do more partnerships and do partnerships that actually have a greater impact? I'm just asking that generally to everyone.
Yes, I mean, I was really meaning you. I wasn't meaning what would help us galvanize, I was meaning what will help you. Because the thing about an entrepreneur is it's a one person. It's an entrepreneur. And Henry Ford, of course, is famous for his, if I'd asked them what they'd wanted, they'd have said faster horses. So he designed the car. And that's the difference, actually, between what you might describe as incremental innovation and transformational innovation. So, I mean this because I actually think that it can be quite a lonely place. You're often having to drag around quite a lot of, well, this is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. We can't do it because this isn't allowed, when they have not even looked whether it's allowed or not. Oh, well, we haven't got any money. Well, no. So what? So I just really meant the question of what helps. And obviously these seminars are designed to do that. But I think it's also interesting to see if there's other things.
Yeah, Janine's just suggested some recognition of social entrepreneurs. I think we have a network of heads of service, which I think has actually worked really well in a social entrepreneur sense, but where the social entrepreneurs have been limited to just managing COVID over the last year, and it's been really effective in that. And I wonder whether that might be something that develops out of that strengthened heads of service network. But Janine, what were you thinking in terms of recognition, sort of, and is there any way that Libraries Connected could support or enable that?
Well, it's interesting actually, because I was going to say, I think Carol's question, what would help you as the change agents to do more? And I think the answer is what has done a lot already is Libraries Connected. That kind of advocacy piece has already gone a huge way to doing that. So just acknowledgement of that. But yes, I'm sure there's always more to do. And I think locally, as you said, Jane, that the standing within the county council is really what's helped you to transform and to take that forward and to get those innovation labs and to keep driving it. And it's changed how the county, how you're seen. And I think that in some authorities, librarians were and still are not seen as necessarily being innovative, when actually we are hugely innovative, we are hugely creative. And I think that's really clear from our relatively new relationship with the Arts Council. It's not really new, but and they have acknowledged that. I think there's a real, we've come on a journey with that relationship where they're now absolutely saying, gosh, you do an awful lot with a very small amount of money, don't you, libraries? And we do. And I think that is now happening in the business sphere around BIPC and other projects like that in Gloucestershire. I just wonder whether I really like that term of social entrepreneurs, and I think we're not always seen as that locally within our own organisations. Perhaps more so in mutuals. I don't know whether they're a bit more agile.
I wonder whether we could pull something together and pull kind of a bit of a set of profiles almost of the work that some people do, some of the heads of service and commercial managers do, to really kind of identify and strengthen that sense of it being social entrepreneurship rather than management, which I think is it. And it's almost that sort of that shift from management to leadership, and then also then from leadership to entrepreneurship, and it's almost like a next step or a different step. I'm just picking up on what Stephen Walter said. It's mentally easy to contribute brilliant outcomes to strategic outcomes, but not be part of the strategy, so it can get not get the recognition it deserves. I think that might also come back then to what we started off talking about with for example, things like the JNSAs and looking at the strategies that come out of them and seeing what partnerships we can do to address the objectives, where we're almost a passive partner in that. We're seeing that there's an objective there. We're then doing something that meets it rather than actually engaging with it. And perhaps there's something more that we need to be doing there around strategic engagement there. Yes, absolutely. Host the strategic development day. So especially when the libraries are back open again, which can't be too long now, actually being able to use some of that. So particularly for Jane, being able to hold a launch event for the COVID recovery strategy in Gloucestershire in one of the libraries, in one of the innovation labs would be amazing, that kind of thing. Brilliant. Are there any final questions?
Ian,
Yeah.
just got one more comment about some of the things that we just spoke about. A while back, as part of the BIPC events, we did hosted an author who wrote a book about how to be more pirate, and it was the Steve Jobs, I think, comment about I'd rather have been a pirate than join the Navy or something like that. And it came up, and I think Carol was talking about Henry Ford. It was that how it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, and we all sit in big organizations which have these massive risk averse processes and things that seem to get in your way, those rocks that you're talking about, Carol, going uphill, but actually libraries are uniquely positioned in terms of the connections that we have both within communities and maybe what Jane was talking about, working with a local business or a set of businesses which pertain to that area's business interest or support, that actually we also have a role which invites engagement from other non-standard statutory organizations and things like that. We actually, being a safe place, not just for people to come in and use our library services, but actually to come and talk to us about different opportunities. And actually, maybe we've got an opportunity to be a bit more pirate and set things up. And then when we get the good news stories, which we can then go up the chain with and say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know we weren't meant to do that. I just thought we were getting on and do some decent social entrepreneuring. So it's it's interesting. I think actually libraries, I mean, I've been in libraries for 6 or 7 years, and I think even though we've just come through a pandemic or whatever, the opportunities that we have, I think, are both challenging but enormous, and I think we're so well positioned, if we can be more pirate. That's it.
Absolutely. I couldn't have summed the whole session up better, Nick. So thank you for that. I also think that being more pirate goes hand in hand with what Carol was saying about creating desire as well. So creating desire for partnerships and reaching out and actually meeting outcomes, meeting needs, reaching outcomes. it feels like actually that activity of becoming more pirate is going to generate more desire as well, and more excitement, enthusiasm, and really that kind of that drive to get those things in place. So finally, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's participated, but particularly to Carol and Jane. So Carol, we will circulate some information about the quorum stories and the libraries as well, around the people who've been part of this, but we can circulate it more widely if that would be helpful too. And Jane, if you would like us to circulate any information about your partnership with the LEP, that would be absolutely brilliant. And I suspect you're going to get lots of people just beating down your door trying to find out a bit more of it as well. So thank you again. The next of these webinars is in a fortnight's time, and we'll same time, and it will be focused on commissioning. So more fun than it sounds, but because essentially commissioning is the route to getting some of these partnerships in place as well. So thank you very much, and I shall see you in two weeks' time.